Good afternoon and welcome back to another We Are Sunderland briefing. We have a bit of an update eventually. I'm joined by Scott Wilson, who's in Germany, so you'll have to bear with us if there's any sort of connection issues. But how are you doing, Scott?
Yeah, it's we're there, aren't we? Or we're nearly there after a long time without much. It's nice to be able to report on something pretty much getting over the line, hopefully.
Yeah, so just a quick one before we get stuck into it. Obviously, We Are Sunderland's in partnership with the Farm Museum and Cospex Opticians. You can subscribe to We Are Sunderland for just £1 for 6 months for all the latest developments on the head coach. Now, obviously, it came out earlier today. Lorient boss Regis Le Bris is very close to becoming the new head coach, the new man in the dugout at the Stadium of Light. Scott, you've been across that, obviously, this morning along with myself. Finally, we're at an end. We're at least very close to an appointment being made.
Yeah, it's taken kind of long enough to get here, hasn't it? But I think the key thing from a Sunderland perspective is that, as you rightly say, the end is near. We understand that talks with Lorient over the release of Le Bris from his contract there are now at a pretty advanced stage. The work permit issue has been there in the background, but we're led to believe that that's resolved now. Le Bris wants to come to Sunderland. He's very much kind of bought into what Sunderland want from him. Sunderland, obviously, it has been a long, drawn-out process. There's no getting away from that, and we'll probably touch on that in a second. But I think they're pretty keen to stress that Le Bris has been very much one of the candidates that they've been looking at all the way through this process. And obviously, we all know that Will Still was offered the job. That didn't happen. I think as soon as that kind of was off the table, then Sunderland moved their focus to Le Bris. Now, it's taken longer than I think they thought it would to get it over the line. As I say, work permit's been an issue. Getting him out of his contract at Lorient has been an issue. But all the soundings we're getting are that it's just about there, and hopefully will be confirmed in the next couple of days, and then that'll be plenty of time for Le Bris to take over ahead of the players' return for pre-season training, which obviously begin to come back at the start next week. The end of next week.
I mean, that certainly needed to happen, didn't it? There needed to be a new man at the helm before pre-season so they can get in and hit the ground running.
Yeah.
One of the factors as well with Lorient's relegation from League One, they've gone through a couple of changes behind the scenes. I think former Arsenal defender Laurent Koscielny's gone in there as a sporting director. But he's still, regardless of the relegation, I think we might as well, we'll touch on Regis Le Bris a bit. He doesn't have a great deal of managerial experience. The Lorient job is his first job at the senior level. He does have a very, very, he's very highly thought of in terms of youth development. That's what the majority of his career was spent doing. He was in charge of Lorient under-19s and then the B team before he took that job. When you sort of delve into his background, he certainly looks to be the character, the type of coach that would fit the mold that Sunderland want. Of course, I think what's interesting is he's the first French appointment that we've had under, Kirill Louis-Dreyfus. There's a lot of French players in this squad. It'll be very interesting to see how things develop. We're also led to believe that his English is pretty good as well, which is also an important factor that the club have had to consider. On the face of things, some people will point, to the relegation and be a bit disappointed or maybe underwhelmed with the appointment. But I think it's pretty clear now that this has to be a clean slate, doesn't it? I've added a piece on We Are Sunderland about, avoiding a Michael Beale 2.0 appointment where it seemingly felt a little bit rushed, perhaps stumbled into after they found out about Will Still back in December about the compensation fee. But there's certainly a need for a bit of a clean slate from now on, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because up until halfway through last season, if you look at Le Bris, then I think he would have ticked pretty much every Sunderland box, like you said. Highly regarded coach, regarded as a bit of an innovator. Was overachieving certainly in his first season at Lorient when he got them to 10th in the French top flight. That's pretty much the highest they've ever been. The elephant in the room, if you like, the worry is last season, isn't it? Because as you say, there's no real glossing over the fact that he got relegated with with Lorient at the end of last season. Now, managers can get relegated, can't they? Bayern Munich have just appointed Vincent Kompany, and he got relegated with Burnley. So, getting relegated is not the be-all and end-all, but the reality is that a lot of Sunderland fans will point to that as the key factor on his CV and say, well, what have Sunderland seen in this guy? Well, I think what Sunderland will say is, well, what we've seen is everything that he's done up to that point. We've seen the work that he's put in. We've seen the players that he's developed. We've seen the way that he's grown that club. And all of that stands, and all of that, those are very valid reasons for Sunderland to have kind of pursued him. But on the other side of the coin, there is no getting away from the fact that after a 3-month process, they're appointing a manager who was relegated last season. And that will colour the views of some supporters. Now, like you say, that feels like it would be a bit unfair because, Nice wanted to take Le Bris there in January. So, it's not like this is a guy who nobody else has been interested in. If he hadn't have had a €5 million release clause in his contract, I think he would have gone to Nice at the turn of the year. And, they're one of the biggest clubs in France. So, this isn't a kind of managerial nobody we're talking about here, anything but. But he's still got to prove himself, given that he did get relegated last season.
Yeah, and results, as is always the case, that is the defining factor. That's what managers are judged on. I think people are right to point that out. When I say clean slate, obviously I don't mean in the sense of the fan sentiment towards how the club's been run at all. I think people are perfectly entitled to have the opinion. The mistakes that were made, both on and off the pitch last season. The club hierarchy's come out and said about learning the lessons from last season. But in terms of a head coach, it's important that he's given an opportunity, I think, isn't it? I think we're in a day and age now of so many head coaches and managers who perhaps aren't given time to develop and build a squad and a team.
Yeah, and that's that's where he's unfortunate in that he's inheriting a situation through no fault of his own where there's a fair amount of toxicity, isn't there, between the Sunderland support base and the way that the club has been run from the moment that Tony Mowbray was sacked. And I think that's perfectly understandable and perfectly justified. As you say, Le Bris is coming into this now as a fresh pair of eyes with a fresh broom. Yes, we know that there will be limitations to his role in terms of transfers, in terms of the way that Sunderland buy and sell players. We know that. But he's still the head coach. It'll still be his kind of footprint all over this squad. He's got to come up with a team. He's got to develop these players. He's got to do all of that. So, he needs to be given an opportunity to do that, absolutely. But, the wider context here is that Sunderland, not even largely, exclusively through their own kind of decision-making, have got themselves into a position where they are starting the new season on the back foot. There's no denying that in terms of the mood within the fan base and everything. So, Le Bris is going to have to hit the ground running, and he's going to have to get early results because through no fault of his own, the fans will demand that because of the absolute shambles at the end of last season. There has to be an improvement on that.
Yeah, I mean, the transfer window as well. I mean, Mike Dodds came out and said that, the head coach, the first couple of signings be a real indicator as to where the club want to go. We've had the first signing through the door as well in Simon Moore, in terms of goalkeeping, adding a bit of experience there behind the scenes. It's a good start. It also raises, from my point of view, just a couple of questions about, obviously, the goalkeeping department. Obviously, there's interest in Anthony Patterson. We're not led to believe that, that signing is to replace Patterson by any means. But, you've got Nathan Bishop there. You've got Alex Bass, who's now gone out the door. You've got Adam Richardson, Matty Young. It's quite a competitive group that they've got there now, isn't it?
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see what happens with Bishop. If Bishop leaves, and I think there's probably a decent chance that happens, and it suggests that Sunderland were looking at their goalkeeping position last year and saying, do you know what, we don't really fancy Bishop or Bass as a long-term successor to Patterson if he was to leave or if he was to get a serious injury. So we need to sign someone for that position who we've got a bit more faith in. And I think that's where Moore ticks all of those boxes. He'll add experience. He'll push Patterson hard. He'll accept being a number two if that's the role that he plays, but he'll be ready to step in if something happens with Patterson in terms of injury or anything like that. I mean, yeah, if Sunderland get a bid they feel they can't turn down for Anthony Patterson, they will be going out and spending some of that money on a new first choice goalkeeper. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think it also shows that Sunderland don't think that either Young or Richardson are quite ready to be stepping in if anything was to happen to Patterson next season. And that's probably right. And that probably means that they'll both get loan deals again this time. And it'd be very interesting with Young in particular to see just how high up the pyramid he ends up, because, you know, we all know that he got rave reviews for what he was doing at Darlington. But you know, at the end of the day, that is National League North. So, you know, he needs a season of Football League experience in either League One or League Two, if he can at all get it. And then maybe in 12 months' time, we'll be talking about someone who really is knocking on the door to be Sunderland's first choice keeper. Yeah,
I mean, obviously, we can discuss, you know, at length in the future once, you know, Regis is in and has been confirmed. There's an interesting point that Carl makes here. Obviously, there's been plenty of discussion about Dodds and Proctor and the makeup of that backroom staff. That'll be interesting to have a look at and see when Regis is appointed, which, you know, as we'll say, we're led to believe that that's very close. I'm interested just to pick your brains on that, because I know I've spoken on here last week with Joe. The coaching side of things at Sunderland's been a bit of a strange one for me looking in. I understand people are highly rated, etc., but it's not uncommon for coaches to bring in their own backroom staff, which for me felt like, you know, we're not privy to the ins and outs of these conversations and how they were, how they unfolded. But to me, that felt a little bit odd. At least having seen Michael Beale come in the past and he didn't bring anyone in with him.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hot topic, isn't it? And it's going to be very, very interesting to see who comes in with Regis Le Bris. I mean, all the talk right through this process has been that the final appointment would probably be able to bring in one senior figure, and they'd slot into the existing coaching staff, which would mean there will still be roles for the likes of Mike Dodds and Michael Proctor. So it'd be interesting to see how that ends up. Yeah, you know, how much power will the new guy wield in terms of being able to bring in his own appointments? How much will Sunderland impose on him, and how much faith do the Sunderland hierarchy still have in the coach and staff that obviously was there when things weren't going well in the second half of last season? I think, watch this space for all of those things. I mean, like I say, all the way through the process, the soundings have been that one senior figure will be coming in with the new boss. Well, we'll find out pretty soon if that's right or not, won't we?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it was Will Still's. After the Will Still sort of debacle, that's when that claim sort of first came about. It's interesting as well that, you know, Regis Le Bris was one of 5 head coaches who were being considered, but not necessarily in any sort of pecking order. I thought that was quite an interesting sort of.
Yeah, that's the kind of steer we've been getting, isn't it? I mean, I guess what you would say about that is, so they've identified 5 kind of key targets, if you like, key people who they want to look at and they want to speak to. All of a sudden, one of them becomes available with no compensation required. Will Still, obviously. So I can understand why at that point they say, well, okay, if we've got 5 and we think they're all pretty much of a muchness, but we're going to have to pay to get 4 of them out of clubs, but one now, which we thought we were going to have to, all of a sudden we can get for nothing. Well, let's go for that first. And so I think that's why there was then all the focus went on Still. Sunderland obviously met Still. It got a long way down the road. Then, you know, kind of from nowhere, Lon's come onto the scene. Still's head gets turned. He moves off. Okay, so now your 5-man shortlist is a 4-man shortlist. Where are you going to go? And Sunderland have decided that Regis Le Bris is the outstanding option from those other 4. You know, I think we kind of know who a couple of them were, don't we? There's probably a couple that you know, were never taken far enough down the line that it got out, if you know what I mean. But I think that the move for Still was driven by the fact that all of a sudden he was available for nothing. When that fell through, it was okay. Well, who is now the next best candidate? And Sunderland have decided that's Le Bris. And you know, quite understandably, they've had an awful lot of flack for the amount of time that this has taken. In Sunderland's slight defence, I guess what they would say is, well, 3 weeks ago, we made the decision on Le Bris. It's just taken that long to get it to a point where it's just about over the line, because there have been work permit issues. We understand that had to go to an appeal, but that is resolved now. And then there's also been the issue of compensation with Lorient, who understandably, given they've just been relegated, are holding out for the absolute best deal they can possibly get.
Yeah, I mean, as you say there, look, the £5 million release clause that, was suggested to Nice last season, after he signed a 5-year contract in 2022. So it's clearly how highly regarded he is. It just, as you say there, it comes on the back of a tinge, of underwhelming, of it being an underwhelming appointment in the eyes of Sunderland supporters. And I get that. But again, I do think, as we said, at the very start of this pod, it will be important to judge him on what we see. We already know, the flaws or the downfalls of Sunderland's squad. Last year the end was so disappointing. It's a young squad. His background seems to fit in. It just, for me now, that this is the start of the summer. For all the talk of ambition, this has to be your platform, your base of where you go.
Yeah, and the hope would be, wouldn't it, that everything will follow on from there. So we'll see more signings. We'll start to see a pre-season schedule. We'll start to see how Le Bris is going to line his team, or what they're going to look like, what type of football they're going to play, all that kind of stuff now. Because, for all that Sunderland will claim that their project, their model, their structures are all in place, and that actually, yes, there hasn't been a head coach, but everything else has been going on. Well, that's fine. But the head coach still defines so much of what happens at a football club that, Sunderland desperately needed one in place. It looks like they're going to get that hopefully at the start of next week. So, yeah, you'd like to think that is a kind of chapter closed and a new one beginning, wouldn't you?
Yeah, of course you would. Thanks again for joining me, Scott. We just thought we'd drop in with a quick briefing, a quick update. Given the announcement today, we'll be back in, later next week. Once we've had confirmation, we'll delve into things a little bit deeper, provide maybe a little bit more context and how the moves came about. But thanks again for joining us this afternoon.